The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, the kind that rose and fell like the hum of distant thunder. It wasn't a typical session. Cameras were discreetly tucked along the gallery's upper corners. The stakes were high, a federal oversight hearing concerning judicial ethics and separation of powers. Representative Jasmine Crockett, polished in her signature blazer and steady heels, stepped forward with her binder clutched tightly. She wasn't new to scrutiny, but this wasn't just any witness. This was Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and the tension was unmistakable. Seated before her, Kavanaugh reclined slightly, fingers interlocked across his midsection. He watched her approach the microphone with the faintest curl of amusement tugging at his lips. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said with a raised brow, "do try to keep your questions concise. I've already endured several lectures today." A few restrained chuckles trickled from his allies on the right. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She adjusted her papers, then lifted her gaze. Her voice was steady, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here to entertain you, Justice," she said coolly. "I'm here to remind the American people that no one, not even those in robes, is above accountability." The gallery went silent. And just like that, the game had changed. Justice Kavanaugh's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected her to bite back so early, and certainly not with that much precision. Still, he shifted in his seat and chuckled, the sound low and performative. "Well, I hope you've come with something more substantial than attitude," he said, reaching for the glass of water beside him. Jasmine leaned into the microphone. "Let's start with something simple, then," she said, flipping to a marked page in her binder. "On June 12, you attended a closed-door event sponsored by a political group currently under investigation for financial misconduct. Care to explain how that aligns with judicial impartiality?" A low murmur rippled through the room. Kavanaugh blinked. "That meeting was, off the record." Jasmine cut in. "Unrecorded. Unreported until whistleblowers came forward." She stepped closer to the bench, voice growing sharper with each word. "You sit on the highest court in this country, and you chose to associate with an organization that has openly advocated for policies under review by your own court." Kavanaugh's fingers twitched on the desk. "Congresswoman, you're dangerously close to impugning the integrity of—" "No," Jasmine said flatly. "I'm confronting it. Because what you call integrity, millions of Americans now see as selective silence and privilege." There was no laughter now. No chuckles. Just stunned stillness. Even the stenographer had paused, briefly forgetting to type. Justice Kavanaugh adjusted his tie, his composure cracking under Crockett's relentless tempo. He leaned forward, this time with the tone of a man trying to regain control. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice tight, "I don't believe this hearing is meant to stage political theater." Jasmine didn't blink. "Neither do I, Justice. But when the stage is already set with secrets, someone has to turn on the lights." A sharp gasp from the gallery cut through the tension. The committee chair glanced nervously at his colleagues. Crockett's words weren't just rhetorical jabs, they were backed by documents. Emails. Itineraries. Names. She tapped the binder again, letting the sound echo. "Your name appears in direct correspondence with a board member of that group 2 weeks before they filed an amicus brief in one of your active cases." "That's," Kavanaugh began, voice rising. "That's documented," she snapped. "And it's a conflict of interest that would have disqualified any judge in a lower court. But you sail above the rules because you wear 9 layers of untouchable." Gasps turned to murmurs. Reporters in the back scribbled furiously. Kavanaugh tried to interject, but she wasn't finished. "You mocked my presence here today, Justice," Jasmine said, her voice turning cold as steel. "But I came with facts. Not feelings. Receipts. Not reputation." And with that, she held up a sealed envelope. The whistleblower who provided this wanted the truth seen, not buried in red tape or dismissed by a laugh. Now even Kavanaugh looked unsure. The envelope, its very existence, had tilted the floor beneath him. And Jasmine? She hadn't even raised her voice once. The room was utterly still, as if time itself had stopped to hear what was inside that envelope. Jasmine Crockett let the silence stretch just long enough to let everyone feel it, the discomfort, the suspense, the weight. Then, deliberately, she handed the envelope to the committee clerk. "This," she said, "contains internal communications between Justice Kavanaugh and multiple political operatives tied to the event in question, including logistical coordination, language vetting, and even discussion of optics in case of media exposure." The clerk passed it to the chairman, whose expression shifted from bored to visibly pale. He looked at the first few lines before shooting a glance at Kavanaugh, one not of respect, but of alarm. Kavanaugh opened his mouth, but Jasmine was already speaking again. "Justice, you mocked me earlier. You assumed I was here to posture. But I didn't come to perform, I came to prosecute." She turned slightly, addressing the rest of the chamber. "I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. So did he. The difference is, I still remember what that oath means." A hush followed. One senator on the panel cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly in his chair. Reporters now had their phones out, already composing the story that would hit the front page before the hearing ended. Jasmine faced Kavanaugh one final time. "You may wear a robe, but that doesn't make you untouchable. And if you think I'm finished, you're more out of touch than your record already suggests." The judge stared at her, lips pressed into a thin line, no words coming out this time. The chill in the air wasn't from the AC. It was her voice. Her delivery. Her proof. The courtroom was frozen, and Crockett owned every square inch of it. Judge Kavanaugh sat motionless, the weight of the envelope still rippling across the chamber like a silent detonation. Gone was the easy confidence, the practiced grin. His eyes darted briefly toward the exit, a flicker, but telling. Jasmine Crockett remained planted, firm and composed. She didn't need theatrics. The facts were the fireworks. The chairman leaned into his microphone, voice stiff. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you stating that you have direct evidence of ethical violations by a sitting Supreme Court justice?" Jasmine nodded. "Yes, Mr. Chairman. And I have more. But let's not pretend this is new behavior. What's new is someone willing to say it with a mic turned on." A few gasps. Someone on the panel whispered to their aide. The tone of the room had changed, not just tense, but unstable. Kavanaugh's status no longer made him immune. It made him the focus. He finally spoke. "This is a calculated attack," he said, his voice low but shaking. "You're smearing me in public for political gain." Jasmine didn't even look at him. "Respectfully, Justice, no one smeared you," she said coldly. "You did that yourself. You just never thought anyone would hold the mirror up this close." She stepped back from the microphone, pausing to let the words linger. One of the senior senators turned to the chairman and asked for a recess. Cameras snapped. Staffers began moving toward the bench. Even the court security officers exchanged uncertain glances. And Kavanaugh? For the first time since he took the bench that morning, he looked small. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. "Recess granted," the chairman announced. 15 minutes. The courtroom erupted into motion. Reporters rushed to the hallway. Staffers huddled. Kavanaugh leaned toward his legal advisor, whispering furiously, though his eyes kept flicking back to Jasmine Crockett. But she didn't move. She stood alone at the witness podium, thumbing through the same binder with a calmness that felt almost surgical. She wasn't gloating, she was focused. Ready for the next strike. A younger aide from the committee sidled up to her. "Ma'am," he whispered nervously, "I don't think anyone expected that." She closed the binder. "They never do," she said, not looking up. "They expect noise. I brought evidence." Outside the chamber, cameras clustered at the exits. Commentators were already labeling it a historic confrontation, unprecedented tension, a moment the court would not forget. And inside, Kavanaugh was unraveling. He removed his robe slowly, as if the fabric itself had grown heavy. His voice lowered into urgent tones with his counsel, who was now reviewing the envelope Jasmine had introduced. His hands trembled, barely, but enough. Back at the podium, Jasmine quietly reviewed her final tab. More receipts. Dates. Witnesses. She hadn't even used her strongest piece yet. And everyone, including the judge himself, was beginning to realize, this wasn't the peak. This was only the climb. The courtroom reconvened with a strange hush, not of boredom, but of anticipation. Every eye shifted toward Jasmine Crockett as she approached the microphone again. Even the committee chair leaned forward, uncharacteristically alert. Judge Kavanaugh returned to the bench slower this time. His confidence had curdled into defensiveness. He no longer scanned the room, he stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. Jasmine began without introduction. "Let's proceed," she said evenly. "I'd now like to enter into the record an audio file." Kavanaugh's head snapped up. The clerk inserted a USB into the committee's system, and seconds later, the room filled with voices, one of them unmistakably Kavanaugh's, speaking candidly in what sounded like a private donor call. "We've got to keep the court aligned. This next case, if we don't control the language in advance, it could fracture everything we've built." Gasps broke out across the room. The chairman looked stunned. Crockett continued. "This call, dated 2 weeks before the court declined to hear a challenge that would have overturned a key donor's financial interests, shows an active attempt to manage outcomes, not interpret law." Kavanaugh stood abruptly. "That recording was obtained without, it was legally submitted by one of the attendees," Jasmine said, not missing a beat. "One who believed the court should serve justice, not private influence." The judge opened his mouth again, but the words didn't come. His jaw tensed. His hand clenched the side of the bench. Jasmine turned once more to the committee. "This isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. The American people deserve a court that serves the law, not backroom deals. And if that makes some of us uncomfortable," she said, glancing toward Kavanaugh, "then maybe discomfort is exactly what accountability feels like." The courtroom had never felt colder. And this time, Kavanaugh didn't even try to smile. The silence that followed the audio clip wasn't just heavy, it was historic. Not a shuffle. Not a breath. The courtroom had become a vault of disbelief. Justice Kavanaugh remained standing, frozen mid-retort. But the damage was done. The words he had spoken, confident, private, revealing, now echoed through every corner of the judiciary and into every living room watching the broadcast. Jasmine Crockett calmly retrieved a final document from her binder and held it up. "This," she said, "is a draft memo, written by the same group that hosted the event you attended, Justice, proposing language for a Supreme Court decision. That memo was sent 2 days before the ruling came down. Nearly verbatim." She handed it to the clerk. The chairman looked pale. "This suggests not just impropriety," she continued, "but coordination." The word hit like a bullet. One of Kavanaugh's defenders on the panel interjected nervously. "Congresswoman, this is crossing into the territory of impeachment suggestion." She turned to him without flinching. "Then maybe it's time someone crossed it." Kavanaugh finally found his voice, but it was thin, almost brittle. "You're using innuendo and half-truths to try and destroy a sitting justice." "No, sir," Jasmine snapped, her voice as cold as the marble walls. "You destroyed the trust in your position. I'm just holding the mirror up." Her words settled like ice. The judge sank back into his seat. Not from strategy. From collapse. The courtroom didn't just see a confrontation. They saw a reckoning. And Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman. She was a storm in heels. By now, the courtroom was no longer merely a chamber of law, it was a crucible. The heat had shifted, but not from Kavanaugh's side of the bench. The justice, once towering in presence, now looked visibly diminished. His posture hunched. His eyes averted. His team whispered urgently, their confidence visibly fractured. Jasmine Crockett didn't bask in it. She remained calm, clinical. This wasn't victory. It was exposure, and exposure was just the beginning. The chairman cleared his throat, barely finding his voice. Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe these materials rise to the level of judicial misconduct? I believe they go beyond it, she answered smoothly. They suggest premeditated compromise, institutional manipulation, and a direct betrayal of public trust. The words were like strikes of a gavel in themselves. Sharp. Measured. Unshakable. A senior senator known for defending the judiciary leaned toward his mic. What are you recommending? Jasmine glanced around the room before replying. A bipartisan ethics review of all communications tied to that donor group, starting with Justice Kavanaugh's calendar, travel, and private meetings, she said. And a freeze on any case rulings involving that group until full transparency is achieved. It wasn't just bold. It was surgical. Even Kavanaugh knew it. He finally spoke, but his voice was barely more than a murmur. This will destroy faith in the court. No, Justice, Jasmine said without missing a beat. You did that. The room trembled, not from sound, but from certainty. A shift had taken place. And no robe, no gavel, no legacy could stop it now. Justice Kavanaugh sat hollow-eyed, the authority head once carried reduced to a shell. For the first time in his long judicial career, he wasn't the one asking questions. He wasn't even answering them. He was cornered by them. And Jasmine Crockett? She stood like she'd been carved from stone. I'd like to remind this committee, she said clearly, that judicial power comes not from robes or rituals, but from respect. And when that respect is lost, so is the legitimacy of the bench. The chairman, normally cautious, leaned forward. Congresswoman Crockett, are you calling for a formal inquiry into Justice Brett Kavanaugh's fitness to remain on the Supreme Court? She didn't blink. I am. A ripple of gasps spread through the gallery. The weight of her words sank into every shoulder in the room. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters texted in a frenzy. Social media was already boiling over. Kavanaugh looked stunned, like he had just witnessed the beginning of something irreversible. Because he had. I'm not here for a headline, Jasmine continued. I'm here for the Constitution. And the people who trusted us to uphold it. That trust is not negotiable. The chairman hesitated, then nodded. Slowly. Gravely. The committee will review the submitted evidence and determine whether an investigative subcommittee should be formed. Kavanaugh slumped slightly in his chair. No objection. No fire left. The robe no longer shielded him. The room no longer revered him. And Jasmine Crockett? She walked away from the podium with silence in her wake, the kind that comes after the explosion. The hearing adjourned with the sound of the gavel, but no one moved. The silence clung like humidity, thick, lingering, heavy with implication. Justice Kavanaugh remained seated, staring blankly ahead as aides collected his papers. He didn't speak. Didn't nod. Just sat. The weight of Jasmine Crockett's words still pressing down harder than any ruling he'd ever delivered. Outside the chamber, chaos unfolded. Reporters clustered around microphones. Headlines flashed across phones. Crockett sparks judicial earthquake, Kavanaugh faces formal scrutiny, unprecedented ethics challenge hits Supreme Court. Crockett, flanked by her chief of staff and two aides, stepped before the cameras. Her voice didn't waver. We must not fear accountability simply because it's uncomfortable, she said. Judicial independence cannot be a shield for misconduct. Today was not about vengeance. It was about vision, for a court that serves the people, not private interests. Back inside, senators from both parties huddled in uneasy clusters. Some were stunned into silence. Others were already calculating the political cost of standing with or against her. Justice Kavanaugh was quietly escorted out a side door. No press conference. No statement. No smile. Later that evening, legal analysts from across the spectrum would admit, they had never seen a sitting member of Congress so precisely and unapologetically hold a Supreme Court justice's feet to the fire, and survive it. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't just survived. She had shifted the balance. And everyone knew, the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. In the days that followed, Washington buzzed with the tremors of the confrontation. Editorials poured in. News cycles churned. Petitions surfaced. And for the first time in decades, the legitimacy of a sitting Supreme Court justice was being questioned not behind closed doors, but on every screen in America. Justice Brett Kavanaugh released a statement, vague and defensive, calling the hearing politically motivated and deeply unfair. But the damage was done. Trust had been cracked, not by rumor, but by record. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett returned to Capitol Hill with more than just headlines. She returned with momentum. Her evidence was officially entered into the congressional record. A subcommittee was approved. Transparency hearings were greenlit. Whistleblowers stepped forward, not in fear, but inspired by her clarity and fearlessness. In private, some senior Democrats urged her to slow down. Others quietly asked her for advice. But Jasmine moved forward on her own terms, precise, focused, and unafraid of titles. In a CNN interview the following week, she was asked, "Do you regret challenging a Supreme Court justice so directly?" Her answer was instant, "No. I regret that it had to come to that. But I don't regret being the one who refused to look away." And just like that, she shifted again, from rising figure to national force. Not for shouting. Not for spectacle. But for staring down power in its most insulated form, and not blinking. The courtroom had frozen that day. But the movement it sparked. That was just heating up.